word, Lord. Lord, just protect the church and be with those who need healing tonight, Lord, and word of encouragement, all those things, because it's trying times, and we can definitely get confused on what we should be looking for, and we know that we need to look towards your word for the absolute truth. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, Genesis chapter 11. So building off of the story of Shem, that's where we left off last week, and we understand that chapter 10 was kind of an overview, and then chapter 11 is more detail about what happened within chapter 10. So it's not in chronological order. And we saw that a lot of times in Revelation, where Revelation would describe something and then take a pause in the next chapter to bring more detail to what it had just talked about. And so chapter 11, especially the first 9 verses here, is the event that led to the distribution that chapter 10 talks about. Chapter 10 is the distribution of the sons of Noah and the 70 nations that would come from these 3 sons and how it would populate the world. Well, chapter 11 is going to say, here's the main cause, here's the main reason of the distribution. And there's a lot of really neat things that we're going to see tonight. So just an overview. We're only going to go through 9 verses tonight. When you see the overview here of chapter 11, it's when man unites together without God, it is basically rebellion. And then God will scatter what man builds in pride so that his redemptive plan will continue. He's always got a plan B, if you will. He always has that separate line that will accomplish his mission. And we see from the very beginning that, the enemy, the adversary, is trying to disrupt God's plan. And honestly, he doesn't have to try very hard. Because of the fall, man is inclined to define for himself what is good and evil. That is the curse of the tree. That's why God said, hey, don't take from it, because once you do that, your eyes will be opened and you will have autonomy, meaning you can decide for yourself which is good and what is wrong. And we still see that very true today, even within the church, even with believers. Believers will still individually self-define, well, I believe this, or I believe that. I mean, that's why you have so many denominations. So many viewpoints. Even within this group tonight, I guarantee you we have a mixed opinion about some things which are good and which things are not so good. You can bring up a topic, and you can be like, well, I don't think that's a big deal. Somebody else over here is like, yeah, that's an absolute big deal. Well, I think it's neither that, I think it's this. And so there's the problem. We're suffering from the fall of man, when really the Bible is the truth. And instead of us trying to figure out our own interpretations of the Bible and trying to self-fit the Bible into my life, I need to adjust myself to what it says. And that's really what's going on here. We see that from Adam to the flood, to God destroying the flood, to Noah and his sons, now again coming back again with man deciding what he is going to do outside of God. So we see some sub-thoughts here: one language, one people, one shared vision, or one shared direction. And then we see human achievement will always turn into organized rebellion. And then God comes down and evaluates man's pride. And the conclusion is, I'm going to scatter and confuse as a judgment and as a mercy. See, a lot of times we just read this as a judgment, but we miss the missing part of mercy in there. And then Babel is definitely a pattern that is going to echo through the entire Bible. So, Genesis 11 is really the bridge between chapter 10 and then chapter 12. Guess what chapter 12 is all about? Abraham. Remember the structure as we were going through the three sons, and you would get a son, and you'd get a list, and it would narrow down. And then it would narrow down to this group, to Eber, and then from Eber to Peleg. Well, we're going to continue that after tonight when we get into 10 again, or chapter 10, verse 10, and then we break down even more detail about Eber, which is where we get Hebrews. Kind of interesting. Eber, Hebrews. And then into Peleg, and then ultimately down to Abraham, who we know Abraham is given the promised line of the Messiah. So, Genesis chapter 11 is pushing the story forward. In Eden, what happened? Man rebelled against God's word. Then, before the flood, man filled the earth with violence continually. After the flood, man rebels again. But it's a little different this time because we see a building up. First of all, it was by a man, Adam. Then we have lots of individual men, and I'm not saying that genderly exclusive, mankind, okay? We have all kinds of individual men rebelling. After the flood, they now come together collectively. So you see the progression. All right? So they centralized themselves with centralized pride, collective self-exaltation, and a flat-out refusal to obey God's word. The refusal was, go and fill the earth, multiply and fill it. They say, nope, we're going to collect right here, and we're going to make a stand, and we ain't going nowhere. That's what they're saying in the story. So, here's something that is really incredible. It's found in Isaiah chapter 46, verse 10. And it says this, I declare the end from the beginning. This is a marvelous thing, and this is very important as we look at the Bible in its entirety. He says, I declare the end from the beginning. What does that mean? That means that you can see the beginning in the end, and you can see the end in the beginning. It kind of ties together when Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and I am the end. So it's really cool because if you look at just that picture and you look at Genesis and you look at Revelation, these are probably two of the most important books of the Bible because they're the beginning and the end. And did you notice when we were going through Revelation how much it tied back to Genesis? And tonight we're going to see how Genesis refers to Revelation 17 and 18 with Babylon. The rest in the middle is just filler information, meaning that it's not just fluff or filler words, but it's filling in the details. It's tying the stories together. But really, if you get a good grasp on Genesis and a really good grasp on Revelation, you have a pretty good understanding of what the Bible says. Babylon, which we're going to see tonight in Babel, is the beast system, the false unity, a man building a name apart from God. He is the Antichrist. He is the pseudo-Christ. He is the other Christ. Revelation 17:18 says it all begins in Genesis chapter 11. Babylon in Revelation is the full-grown tree of what we're going to see the seed of tonight. So, you've heard me say this before. Other people say it. It's not exclusive with me, but the Bible is a story about kingdom battles. What are we battling? God's kingdom and Babylon, the adversary. Everything that's not of God, you can say. And anything that is not of God is what? Rebellion. So, yeah, we can chunk it all up and go, well, there's this and there's that. There's the Antichrist. There's the one world religion. You can chunk it up however you want. But the bottom line is, God says, if you ain't for me, you are what? Against me. So anything that is not in alignment with God is rebellion, is Babylon. Okay? So, You got God's kingdom, and then you got those who would rebel, which we would later unify under one title, Babylon. So the key is false unity is the major thread right here in chapter 11. The Bible unity is unity in truth under God for the glory of God. The Babylonian unity is around man, man's power, man's commerce, man's pride, man's defiance. And let me ask you a question. In fact, I don't think I have to ask very hard, but you see that very much alive today, do you not? We will overcome this. We will come together and conquer that. Anything that is coming together outside of God is Babylon. Look at how the story builds. Starts with one man, Adam. Moves to chaos. Then the flood. After the flood, then you have again rebellion, but this time it moves into an organized rebellion called Babylon. Here's what's interesting. 1 Corinthians 15, 45 through 58. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says, the first man, Adam, created a living being, but the last Adam, that would be Jesus, a life-giving spirit. It is not the spiritual that comes from the first, but the physical, then the spiritual. The first Adam, made of earth, came from the earth. The second Adam came from heaven. Okay, so if we parallel these together with the flow, it starts with a man, Adam, moves to chaos, then the flood. After the flood, you have again rebellion, but now it's organized rebellion, and you get a Babylon. Same pattern. Starts with the second Adam. He brings order from chaos. You reverse this. Okay? Then he takes those from rebellion and organizes them into what Revelation 21 calls the New Jerusalem. The Jerusalem is the city of peace, where Babylon is the city of rebellion. So you've got a opposite flow. And it's really interesting when you start to look at Hebrew words, you can read them from both directions. And they say the same thing in both directions. It's really neat when you start to look at some of that stuff. All right, so let's get into it. Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass that they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. All right, so we're going to have some fun with some Hebrew letters and some pictographs. So the first thing is safar, which is lip, language, and or speech. So the whole earth had one language. When you break that down, the Hebrew word is shin. That's the little W. And if you look at the pictograph, the ancient pictograph, it looks like two front teeth. And when you think of teeth, what do you think of? To break down, to consume, to devour, to press. That's why these Hebrew pictures, they're really good for us, because, you know, you see a pair of teeth and you think, rainbow, Teeth have nothing to do with a rainbow. So the picture actually gives you an indication of what it's trying to say. It's a visual picture. So the teeth are devouring, pressing, consuming, breaking down. The fe is the mouth, and it speaks, declare, release. If you listen to that, or maybe we mentioned it last week, I don't remember, but the fe is the only Greek, that's Old Testament, let's get into that. The only Hebrew letter that causes a breath move. So fe, and that's to speak, to declare, to release. You release the air. And then the he, right, is to reveal, to breath, to hold, to behold, to worship. And the ancient symbol of a he is a little guy going, hey, praising God. Okay? So you have teeth speaking, something that is revealed. So when you combine these letters together, the word actually says a sentence. That's what's cool about the Hebrew. And it says, what is pressed out of the mouth and revealed. Okay, that's just in the word language. This is what's really neat about it, because you read language and you're like, okay, well, English, Spanish, I mean, that's where we go. But you read what their word for language, their definition, their understanding for this word, safa, would be what is pressed out of the mouth and revealed. Now we move to the next letter, or the next word, and it's Devarim and Akkad Adim. And this is a set of words that we look as one word, and it's talking about speech. So when you look at speech, speech is actually these two words put together. And when we look at the picture, the dalet is the doorway or a path behind the curtain. The bet is a house, a family inside. And then the resh is the head. We looked at that last week. The prince, the authority, the king, the leader. So when you combine these letters together, here's what you get. Words that create a pathway into a house of authority. You seeing that? So a pathway, dalat, into a bet, house of authority. That's what's really cool about this Hebrew study that we're doing. And it's really easy for you guys to do, and in time you'll be able to do this for yourself. So you can get some cool stuff. So now, the whole earth had one language and one unified message. So guys, it's not their vocabulary. See, this is where the surface reading of Genesis comes in. Oh, they're one language, so they're all talking the same language. That's not what it's telling us. The Hebrew is actually telling us something different. It's telling us that they were unified together under the same pathway going into the one house of authority, leaving the other house. It's a shared direction. Their speech is unified, their thinking is unified, and their movement is unified. That's important. Because the text is telling us the language is actually an outward expression of what's going on in the inside. The Devarim word, okay, means one structured set of words that creates, here it is, direction and authority. That's what it means. We read words and it's like, okay, well, it's words. No. It's words that literally create a direction and an authority. So we're not just talking about their speech. We're talking about the system that is being built by their speech. But there's more. We need sound effects. I need a sound effect board, Greg. Dun, dun, dun. There's more. There's two words there, right? Remember I said that? The Devarim and the Akkad Adim is two words. And it's putting it together. So if we go back and look at that second word, the Akkad Adim, right? Alaf, which is an ox or a strong leader. The Het, which is a fence or an enclosure. And the Dalet we know as what? A door. This is what this is saying. Unified strength with one boundary moving in one direction. And that's the whole entire definition of one speech. That's the Hebrew mindset. That's what they would understand. So let's put it all together. What is pressed out of the mouth and revealed, words that create a pathway into a house of authority, strength unified with one boundary moving in one direction. That's what's happening with these people. They're not just walking around all talking the same language, folks. This is revealing the heart of the people. Moving on to verses 3 and 4, and then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." And they had bricks for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, Let us build ourselves a city and a tower, whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. All right, I don't know. I tried to emphasize a few things in reading that. What did you catch? Let us, repeated 3 times, right? Pattern, pattern, pattern. But let us make bricks. Let us build ourselves a city. Then let us, right, come together and make a name. Oh, that one's going to blow you away when we get to that one. For what? Ourselves. Where's God in this? He's not there. So now that's their speech. That's their language. That's their attitude. They're coming together going, God, we don't need you anymore. We will take care of ourselves. We will define what is right and what is wrong. Let us. God's going to answer that, by the way, by saying, hey, let us come down. Let us do something about this. But could there be a coincidence? And by the way, that is not a kosher word, because there is no such thing as a coincidence when it comes to the Bible. But where else have we seen the term let us? Creation. Creation, God is saying, hey, let us create, let us order life, let us give life. They're mocking God, they're imitating God by saying, oh no, God, let us. That's prideful, that's self-direction, that's rebellion at the heart. This is important. Would they have known the creation story? Absolutely. See, we get in this mindset that we think that the ancient people were not very smart. I mean, who are these the descendants of, by the way? Noah. And you guys remember the lifespan of these guys? Do you think they could go visit old Grandpa Noah? And Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth be going, man, you should have seen that flood. And by the way, Noah, he would have been alive. And who else would have been alive? Little bit of coexistence there at the very tail end with possibly Adam and his kids. So now Noah's getting the story straight from the horse's mouth that eats the apple. So, I mean, yeah, they would have absolutely known the creation story. So here's what they're doing. They're replicating what God did, but self-defining it. They're imitating God, but they're doing it wrongly. And why? Because of Genesis 3. That's just the answer. That's the answer. You walk around to yourself, you see somebody acting stupid, go, Genesis 3. Right? And then when you act stupid, go, Genesis 3. You won't have to, because your spouse will probably tell you. So when they're saying let us, they're saying this. Let us exercise unity. Let us exercise creativity. Let us build. God created, God built, let us build. And then let us have authority. And they're all doing it 100% independently from God. And that is the core issue. There's a hidden gem in verse 4. I was going to tell you, I told you about it, now I'm excited to show it to you. Let us make a name for ourselves. Guess what the Hebrew word for name is? Here, let me give you a hint. You guys have all the answers, by the way. Shem! Now that's kind of weird, isn't it? Because when we read Shem, what do we think of? The son we just covered. We just talked about Shem last week. And who comes from the line of Shem? Ultimately, the Messiah. So, remember what I said in Isaiah? I declare the end from the beginning. The Antichrist, leader of Babylon, he will say what? I am the salvation. And that's where the podcast went today, by the way. Dave had this thought of, hey, let's talk about the verse where it says, oh, there's Jesus there, and there's Jesus over there, and there's Jesus here, and there's Jesus is everywhere. It's like spotting Elvis in Las Vegas, right? He's everywhere. And it's like, let's boil down and look at, what does that word Jesus mean? It means Yeshua. It means salvation, right? We see that when Gabriel talked to Mary. He says, you will name him salvation because he will save his people. So when they say there's a Jesus there, there's a Jesus here, there's a Jesus everywhere, they're saying there's salvation there. There's salvation here. There's salvation over there. There's salvation in the politician. There's salvation in the economy. There's salvation in, you guys can fill in the rest of the blanks, right? Jesus says in John chapter 14, salvation is only through me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And nobody gets to the Father except through my salvation. Here it is, Shem, my name. That's really neat, isn't it? So the Antichrist is saying, hey, I'm salvation. And that really now is the stories of two kingdoms. But God has his salvation, which we just talked about. So here we have Babel, false name. False name. Self-made Shem. Shem is God's true line. Babylon is the fulfillment in the Antichrist's false name. Jesus is the fulfillment in the true name. So there's a true name and a false name. There's a true Shem and a false Shem. So we have a strong teaching statement that I put in here. Yes, Jesus comes from Shem, and that means the true name saves. That comes through God's chosen line, not the name man tied to building at Babel. I mistyped that. Let us make a Shem for ourselves. You guys tying that together? That's incredible. So again, the Bible is a story of two kingdoms, two names, a false man that builds rebellion, and a true name that gives redemption. All right, verses 5 through 9. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men have built. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they began to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us, go down there, confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. So right there is where now you go into chapter 10 with the explanation of where they all went. Okay? Therefore, its name is called Babel, or Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. So the Lord came down. The Lord came down. They're building up. And what does the Lord do? Comes down. Interesting picture there, isn't it? Because this tells us a lot about what we try to do. We try to get to God. And we don't have to. We don't have to. He comes to us. And really, how do we try to build? You might be thinking, well, I'm not trying to build a tower. That's ridiculous. And a lot of people think they were physically trying to build a tower to reach into heaven. No, the tower says it reached into heaven. Some people propose that they built it so high that God could never flood them out again. It was so high that it would be above any potential floodwaters. And they're still missing the whole point. The whole point is that they were becoming unified. Hopefully now that you guys understand that tonight. And we get away from those silly injections. Because it's deeper than that. It isn't really about them trying to escape a flood or trying to reach into heaven. The whole point is they were in one utter rebellion, and they said, we're going to come together. We're not going to go out and fill the earth. We're not going to be fruitful and multiply, like you said. No, we're going to huddle together, and we're going to control ourselves. We're going to disobey you, God. Now, we see something interesting here. We see the sons of men. You know what the Hebrew is for that? B'nai Adam. The sons of Adam is what the Hebrew says. That's pretty cool. So he says the sons of Adam. This tells us this is a purely human project. Because Adam is what? Fallen. What did we just read in the New Testament? Adam was from the earth. And it's interesting because, in Revelation it talks about the earth dwellers. So you got a parallel there. But here, there's no reference to God's authority. Remember how last chapter we instantly jumped up and we started talking about Eber? And you could misunderstand that Eber was a son of Noah, but he was actually a great-great-grandson. Because he's highlighting Eber, who would come later. And this is kind of what's interesting here, because they're doing the same thing. The son of Adam, he's referencing the heart of man. There's also no divine direction from God. So, the sons of man were building something upward that shows their purpose, shows their rebellion. And when people leave God out of their lives, out of their decisions, out of their goals, gang, it's a statement of rebellion. We see that with the children of Israel when they go against a little town called Ai. And they didn't seek God's direction. They didn't seek his approval. They thought, it's a little town, we got this. I mean, after all, they just came off of the victory of Jericho where they didn't do anything. God told them to march around the city, play some music, and the walls came tumbling down. Right? We all want to do little kid things. And, well, they didn't do anything. Big city, massive walls, great victory. And then they go to this little tiny town in the middle of nowhere and go, let's not waste God's time. We got this. And what happened? They came back with their tails between their legs because that little town handed it to them. And then God says, you have sinned and you have transgressed. There was 2 offenses. The transgression was this. They weren't supposed to take anything from Jericho, and someone did. Right? Direct order. So what was the sin? Did you ever wonder that? A lot of people assume the sin was taking the idol from Jericho. No, that was the transgression. The sin was they didn't seek God's alignment for Ai. That's crazy. And so my point is this. We have decisions. We have lives. We have goals. And if we're not seeking God, we could be walking into an Ai situation. And it's actual rebellion. What does it hurt? That if you're going to do something, you're going, hey, Lord, are you in this? Are you out of this? What should I do? Hey, I have this goal. Is it of you? Going to take this job. Is it of you? Is it not of you? What does it hurt to just seek the Lord? I don't think anything. So when they say, let us make a name, they're not talking about reputation alone. They are saying we will define who we are. We will establish our own identity. We will secure our own legacy. And again, what is this? Genesis chapter 3. So man no longer wants identity with God. They want identity away from God, apart from God. And that's interesting because what does the Bible tell us? We are created in His image. We are always trying to create God in our image when the opposite is true. You know, every culture has this problem. Even us. We want to create a white American Jesus. No. He was furthest from that. We're made in His image. Let's stop trying to define what He is so that it fits our narrative and makes us feel comfortable. Got to stop that. But this word us is kind of cool. Nirdash, actually I said that wrong. Nirdah, there's no S in there. And it's literally let us go down. And here's what's interesting. It's written in the first person plural, which could speak of the Trinity. Some people say it speaks of the divine counsel, but if we look at it in context of what's going on here, and you in context with creation, which they're mirroring by creating the world system instead of God creating His system in the Garden of Eden, the Trinity, in my opinion, kind of makes more sense. So it kind of fits the full Bible perspective, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit working in unity. And this, by the way, is a foreshadowing of the Trinity, which they wouldn't have understood at this point. But the important thing, you can debate the whole us if you want to, but the more important thing is that God comes down. Man says, let's go up, and the contrast there is pretty clear. So verse 7, we have this Baal, and it means to mix, confuse, or to blend. It also could mean break the system. So, the place of the gate, Bab-el, notice there's a B in there, so it's bet with two E, or two vowels, okay? Babylon is what it turns into, means the gate of God or the gate to heaven. So that's what's built out of this. You might ask yourself, why did God scatter the people? Why did He move them around? When God moves, this is important. First of all, what did He do? He came down into the center of their power. The center of their power, and then created movement. So their systems lost order, their systems lost direction, and their systems lost control. Remember, going back, okay, what was the word for language? Remember that? Tying that back to verse 1, what was that? I'll try to go back there quick. Okay, language was to press, consume, to speak, to reveal. So what is pressed out of the mouth is revealed. Remember that whole flow with that whole saying, what the text said? It said, what is pressed out of the mouth and revealed, words that create a pathway into a house of authority, strength unified with one boundary, moving in direction. He comes down there in verse 7, and he says, I am going to scatter this. So, if you and I are in agreement with something, and then we get out of agreement with it, what happens? We go our separate ways. Okay, so let's get out of the surface level here. Because what are we taught about the Tower of Babel? Everybody, for sake of example, everybody spoke Hebrew. And he came down and said, nope, I'm going to confuse all of that. You're speaking Hebrew, you're speaking Spanish, you're speaking Greek, and I'm just using this as an example. And we go up and we're like, speaking a language, and the person's looking at us going, saying, huh? Come on. I don't understand you. That's what's taught at the service level, right? Is that what we all thought? But no. Go back to the Hebrew. We were thinking the same thing. And now he takes our thoughts and goes, psh. And now what you and I used to agree on, now we don't. Guess what? I'm going to go do my own thing. Now, could that come with language? Absolutely. It could be a part of it, but the heart of it is he divided them so they were no longer unified with one direction. Now they have a lot of different directions. And by the way, when you look at the nations that we spoke of in chapter 10, does each nation kind of have their own direction? Yeah, for sure. And one of those nations, Shem, will be divided into two names. And one of those names, which later we're going to see as Abraham, will be dedicated. We first see it with Eber, but will be dedicated as, hey, we're going to stick with God's way. So it's deeper than all of that. And hopefully that's not too much for you guys. But I was flipping through screens like you guys were attached. I hope you kept up with that. Craig's pretty good, so. So their unified system, direction, and control was now mixed up. And listen, here's the thing. When an internal authority collapses, the structure cannot function. That's why Satan wants to do what? Strike the shepherd so that the sheep will scatter. And that's why it's really important for you to church to be praying for your leadership, to be praying for your spiritual protection here, because the target and the enemy is on our backs continually. Yeah? You should hear the stories me, Dave, and Dennis tell each other. Close your ears, Pam and Ruth and Heidi. No, I'm just kidding. You won't believe. You won't believe. But that's the point, right? The temptation for things for us to do and see and participate, it's huge. Right? And that's why you see unfortunately, a lot of pastors fall because they succumb to that. And what does it do to the churches? And the only way we can battle that is the hedge of protection from the church and the support of the church, right? And so, it's huge. It really is important. At the end of the day, this is what I think sometimes churches don't understand is, if you truly entrust your spiritual walk with God through the teaching, right? Understand that it's through you and God alone. Understand that. But as Dennis talked about on Sunday, there's a lot of people that go to a church and their pastors are very surface, or they're teaching other stuff, and the whole church is going along for the ride. They're all in the same boat. And that boat is going down the wrong river, by the way. And it's like, man, if you guys really viewed that, and if you really did trust your relationship with God and your spiritual growth under the pastor that God has appointed over, man, you need to hold that person extremely in high esteem. And I'm not saying that selfishly. I'm saying this is a matter of fact, right? Because oftentimes we beat the shepherd up. We expect him. This is why we're real big on hirelings. You're not a hireling, because hirelings get beat up. But you've got to be called by God, because it's tough, so tough. But you guys got to support, because if you really believe that your spiritual welfare is from this pulpit, is that the most important thing in your life? It should be, but we don't act like it, do we? That's fact. Okay? So, anyway, we look at this, and the next word is puts. Pay, and then the T, the ta, and the two little vowels there, S or U, and then the ps. So the little Y there is where is it at? There, where to go? Oh, right there. This is the TZ sound, so it's like z, like pizza, z. So pa, oo, that right there is the oo, z, puts is how you'd say that. So the puts means to scatter. It's I puts everything there in order. Puts means to scatter. So what is unified is now dispersed. This is not judgment, folks. It's restraint. Because if, God says, there would be nothing that they couldn't do if they accomplished this, but if it was allowed to continue, global rebellion would be what's in place. So instead, God shows mercy, and he enforces his original command, get out of here and go multiply, so that he can focus his attention on Abraham. So as we come to a close, the story of these first 9 verses here is that Babel exposes a pattern that still runs within us. And it starts, by the way, just like it did with Adam, with a man. And then that man is in agreement with another man. They gather together because they agree, and then they build, and then they try to define themselves or ourselves apart from what God is doing. That is the progression. Hava, Naveh, Shem, there's that word Shem again, means agreement, structure, identity, or name. Isn't that interesting? Because you can, even we have it. If you see Calvary Chapel, what? That name identifies itself as something. What does Catholicism do, or Catholic Church? That name defines itself as something. If you see the little Mormon temple, you go, oh, I know what that is. That structure, that building identifies itself as something. So you see the pattern? It still happens today. So agreement turns into an organization, into a structure, and then into a system, and then into a momentum. And there's some spiritual insight in here, because this is where, I just explained it, but this is where religion often forms, through programs, systems, traditions, institutions. That is their Shem. That is their name. That is their identification. And the mark of the beast, so again, we get very surface with that mark of the beast. Is it a little scan code? Is it a chip? Are you ready? It's a Shem. It's an Shem. It's an identity. Have you ever thought about this? Babel wasn't built by atheists. They all believed in God. But they were unified with a spiritual vision that said, no, God, we're going to do it our way. We're going to do it our way. So I want you to ask yourself this. What are you building? What are you building? Are you in alignment with God? Who are you aligning yourself with? Collectively, we have a name. Did you know that? We have a name. In the book of Revelations, chapter 2 and 3, Jesus wrote letters to churches that had a name. And remember, if you were with me in that study, yes, it was a physical. Remember the fourfold views of the churches? The historical view through the churches, the actual literal church that was there, the representation spiritually where they were at. Remember all that? That's all summed up in their Shem. In their Shem. We have a name, Sun Country Community Church. That's a Shem. And we go here and we identify ourselves as this. And people go, oh yeah, you go to that church. And sometimes that's, oh, you go to that church in a good way, or oh, you go to that church in a bad way. Because of what? Because of the identification, the Shem. And are you confusing success with approval? You know, sometimes we got to remind ourselves Jesus only had 12. And we can't go, well, if it's successful, that means it must be of God. And when we start comparing ourselves, it actually is a sin. Because maybe God hasn't called you to be in a success program. We're told to run our race. And maybe our race only has 12. Maybe it has 50, 100. You get the point. And do I establish my Shem with God? That's the questions we ask ourselves. All right. Any questions?